Women prevented from inheriting land, girls kidnapped and forced into marriage. Are these authentic African traditions, or has our customary law been distorted? Many South Africans take inspiration from their heritage, but are we betraying those who find themselves on the receiving end of practices which violate their human rights, especially rural women? With us to discuss this are Kgoshi Setlamorago Tobejane, the President of the Congress of Traditional Leaders, Obed Bapela, Deputy Minister of Traditional Affairs, Togo Mkhwanazi Kaluva, Chair of the Commission for the Protection of Cultural, Religious and Linguistic Communities, Kana Pilani Majake, Whip of the Portfolio Committee on Justice, Thandabantu Nhlapo, Professor of Law, formerly at UCT, Togo Mpumlwana, Deputy Chair of the Commission for Gender Equality, Nolundi Luwaya from the Land and Accountability Research Center, and Sizane Ngubane of the Rural Women's Movement. And in the audience, we have communities from Limpopo, KwaZulu-Natal, Gauteng, and the Eastern Cape. Welcome to you all. Thank you so much for being here. You at home can have your say on Facebook and Twitter. Before we hear from our panel, take a look at this.
Everyone loves a royal pageant, with its pomp and ceremony. In England, Queen Elizabeth turns 90, a milestone even the staunchest anti-royalists will find hard not to get swept up in. Royal families instill a sense of tradition and unity. Here too, traditional leaders connect us to our heritage. They are recognized in our legal and political systems. Ndwedwe in KwaZulu-Natal, a semi-rural area where development is evident. There are brick houses with electricity and piped water. There's satellite television too. Ntombizonke Mgadi's family home is here in Ndwedwe. Her parents are buried here. The area falls under a traditional chief. Mam Gadi and her sisters should have inherited the house and the adjoining land. But when their parents died, ownership went back to the chief. He gave the property to her nephew.
Nalo nje ikhaya angikwazi ukuhamba ngongena lapha nakithi angikwazi ukuhamba ngolungisa elokhuzeni ngokhuleka ngisho emathuneni oma wami ngibheka ukuthi alikadile ngoba umuzi akuseyona wethu siphucwe konke nabazali bethu amathuna konke siphuciwe.
Chief Sfiso Ngobo is the head of the village. He says Mam Gadi's is a complicated family matter. He believes women have a right to land, but because they could get married, it's better to keep the land in a male heir's name. Chief Ngobo recommends Mam Gadi consults her nephew again to resolve the issue.
Ubaba kasekho, imine ngimdala esengumfana okhona ekhaya. Sikhona no auntie bese kuthi yonke ke incwadi ibhalwe ngaye lo. Ngeke vele incwadi ibhalwe ngabo bonke abantu ekhaya. So ngiyacela nje mina ukuthi umama buye akhulume nondodana wakhe. Ileyo nto engisho ukuthi hayi akube khona ukuthula ebantwini. Bande nobuntu ngoba nabo ubuntu ayi buyanyamalala.
When South Africa's constitution was signed in 1996, customary law became equal with Roman Dutch law. The accommodation was that it must be subject to the constitution. However, in practice, in mostly patriarchal rural areas where 17 million South Africans live, it's the opposite. Traditional leaders still see the man as the custodian of the land because he carries the family name. This is a typical traditional court. Villagers come here to report crimes, disputes and grievances. A traditional leader must hear the case, mediate and make a ruling. In many areas, women are not even allowed inside the court and must be represented by a male. Could it be that the entire traditional system has been corrupted, first by colonialism, then apartheid, and now new political forces? Can it be fixed?
Even in the United Kingdom, they still have their own traditional leader, which is the Queen. I don't think that as South Africans we can just jump and say we must scrap the traditional leadership. There are so many good things that people do in the rural areas, and therefore it would be a fallacy to say let's throw the baby with the bathwater. But what's important is we must isolate those discriminatory practices that we feel that are actually oppressing women and men in South Africa, and actually make sure that the traditional leadership institution or the traditional communities are actually transformed to be in line with what is happening, to be in line with constitutional democracy.
I would be very happy that we solve the problems, the African problems in the African way.
The ANC wants to formalise the traditional court system and is pushing the controversial Traditional Courts Bill. It's facing stiff opposition from rural communities and women's rights groups. They say the bill gives too much power to chiefs, who could abuse their positions for personal or political gain.
Corruption is very rife amongst the majority of our traditional leaders. Young women, when they asked to be allocated a piece of land to run their businesses, they were told that they must bring between 60 and 70,000 rand as a bribe, not as buying the piece of land. Our rights as women are not recognized by, I'm not saying all traditional leaders, but by some traditional leaders.
For many women like Mam Gadi, tradition is very important.
Asikwazi ukwenza ndawo kufanele sikwenze la ekhaya. Ikona ke lokho kusukumisa naphansi ukuthi kufanele kwenziwe ilokhuzana imisebenzi. Awukwazi maye sixakekile nathi.
Khoshi, why do we need chiefs in a democracy? And especially, why do we need chiefs getting involved in who inherits the land?
There are no chiefs in South Africa. We have royal leaders, traditional leaders. The usage of the chiefs has its own intention to diminish the very same institution we're talking about it today.
Why do we need traditional leaders getting involved in issues of land inheritance?
When the colonizers took over our land, it was the institution, through our forebears, who mobilized and said, until we become one solid society, we will never defend our land. Therefore, land is on the center of the institution of traditional leadership.
Metogo, our traditions are being used by some men to abuse women. So why hold on to these traditions? Why not just default to the Constitution?
It's because those traditions define who we are, where we come from, and they must determine where we're going to.
Am I correct to say that you supported and even defended virginity testing in KZN for the process of determining the young girls' legitimacy for bursaries? Isn't uhlolwa discriminatory towards young girls purely based on their sexuality? They do or do not qualify to get an education?
Not exactly. You see, if you're saying you've got a bursary for rugby, for instance, that would truly exclude millions of others who don't know how to play rugby. You win one, you lose one. The minute you focus on a particular expertise that you are looking for, or resilience or whatever, you discriminate against the others who don't qualify.
Nolundi, we need our traditional cultural practices because they form part of our identity. It's part of who we are, and most certainly without them, families, communities would disintegrate.
Sure, I can agree with that point. I think that people define their identities and shape who they are based on a lot of things, and culture, custom, tradition is absolutely a part of that. So for me, the tension in the example that Metogo presents is that the bursary scheme for women who pass the virginity test actually fundamentally impacts upon their rights to bodily security and bodily integrity, which is protected in the Constitution. And the difference between that and a scholarship for rugby is that rugby doesn't actually fundamentally encroach on your right to the security and your own freedom in your own body. So there is, for me, a distinction there. And the center of the value that is attached to customs and traditions is about people's ability to choose. And if that's the starting point, then I think that fundamentally people's freedom to shape their identities, drawing on multiple sources, including culture and custom, is then rightfully protected.
All right. And Dr. Obed, I mean, how African are our African traditions, especially considering the influence of colonialism?
Look, I mean, the influence of colonialism had unfortunately damaged our own cultures in South Africa. And indeed, we have to then begin to look at what was it, what it is, how to preserve and how to protect and promote. And I think the department, the sole area working with the traditional leaders, is really trying to begin to look at all of these particular customary cultures and traditions. However, there are those, obviously, that in the current form of democracy, we don't think they are still applicable, and we are going to be having a big endeavor with the traditional leaders to say, for example, ukungenwa, as an example. Forcing yourself on another person, and there was no love relationship that existed. It could have existed for a reason then, but then under democracy we need to review and then begin to look at it.
Yeah.
And so as it should be also a pro-choice on that particular, so that it's not imposed on anybody.
So the young girls should have the right to choose if babatla uhlolwa or not. All right. Mrs. Zani.
I agree with the minister that it should be pro-choice. People shouldn't be forced into it. We are currently mourning the loss of one of our colleagues in KZN. She was adopted when she was only 14 years old, and the guy who adopted her colluded with her uncle.
So she was abducted?
Last month. She was adopted, raped, and forced into a marriage. 8 cows were exchanged, and she became the wife.
Oh my
goodness. And that was it.
Is
and
this
last
limited
month
or is
she
this
committed
widespread?
a suicide.
She committed suicide?
She committed suicide.
All right. Khoshi, young women are being abducted and raped.
I think it is bad that in the name of our tradition and culture, people are sneaking criminal activities under that name. We should distance ourselves from that and to isolate those ones. The law should take its course. Make sure that anyone who commit crime and hide behind ourselves, it's not part of us. The tradition of Ukutwala, it's based on genuine love affair of the two.
I want to come to anybody who's got a comment.
Let us be realistic and accept that the structure of traditional leadership as it is today has been seriously contaminated by successive colonial and apartheid regimes. Chiefs, or rather, I'll use the way because for me, whether you're calling them traditional leaders or chiefs, for me, these are just semantics. With the arrival of successive colonial and apartheid regimes, chiefs became stooges. Let's accept that. They became stooges. They were supposed to get a grip on their subjects, go and take instructions from their colonial master. Remember who was the chief? Mahosh Kamuka, Nebawela under the Native Land Commissioner. They will receive instructions. That's why when they were forced removals, the chiefs were the were beneficiaries. The traditional leadership structure was not inducted into this democratic system, with the result that in my village, the very same chief who was represented, who was an agent of the apartheid government, is today the chairperson of the ANC. So much as we must accept ourselves as Africans, we should not run away from the fact that this structure has been seriously contaminated. The structure needs to be inducted into this new order.
My concern is about the LGBTIs are being threatened by the traditional leaders most of the time. The traditional leaders are using their own powers to assault the LGBTI community, because we are killed by the members of the community due to the commands that comes from the traditional leaders, because they believe that we have the evil spirits. So if we are ill-treated by the traditional leaders, where is the relevant structure that we are going to report the assault that is being done by the traditional leaders?
All right, thank you very much. So not all traditional leaders are bad, but how do we hold the rotten apples to account?
You know, this country is a very unique country. We've got the criminal justice system. For us not to use the criminal justice system when people are committing a crime, and we say, oh, it's the culture. Ultimately, the criminal justice system must kick in when someone abducts a 14-year-old. It shouldn't be a story we discuss here. It should be a story that goes to court after the person is arrested. Why are we talking about criminality when we should be going to the police station?
When we come back, some haunting melodies brought to life by a rising female star. Intrigued? Don't go anywhere.
Yethuluma kumedela umthwalo wakhe, yethuluma kumedela umthwalo wakhe, izolo bakubonile uhamba naye, izolo bakubonile uhamba naye. Yo way, 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 aye. Yethuluma kumedela umthwalo wakhe, yethuluma kumedela umthwalo wakhe, ngoba izolo bakubonile uhamba naye, izolo bakubonile uhamba naye.
Welcome back to the big debate on tradition and human rights. I'm Masachaba Ndlovu. That was Tribute, Birdie Mboweni singing a Dorothy Masuka classic called Magumete. Let's talk about the song, Tribute. That was beautiful.
Thank you very much.
Beautiful. Thank you for that song. Tell us a bit more about the song Magumete. What mthwalo burden is she carrying?
So Magumete is a woman who was involved with a married man. And as generally in society, when a woman like that is recognized, you know, the burden is on her. You know, the blame is usually on her. And so the man is not recognized in all of this. And so what I'm saying with the song is that, you know, she's not the only person here. Let everybody who's involved
take responsibility.
Take responsibility.
Can we find solutions to the problem? I want to come to anybody who's got a comment, but first, Gogo Dineo and Lanzi, you've been nodding your head quite furiously.
No, I haven't. And the thing is that because we talk of diluted culture, we talk of culture that has made African culture a patriarchal culture. African culture is about family systems and community systems. So democracy existed in Africa before the constitution came to being. So we have lost essences of those cultural practices, and a culture that doesn't evolve becomes irrelevant. It is my constitutional right as a Sangoma to practice my traditional belief systems, but the bylaws of this country does not allow for me to do river rituals. I was chased away at a suburban era because our township rivers are linked to sewages. So this constitution, who does it serve? Is it serving all Africans, or is it serving the privileged?
All right, is there anybody else that would like to? Yes, Mama.
We do have a constitution. The constitution is the supreme law of the country. We all agreed that we have a constitution, and any practice that deviates is unconstitutional. If there are practices that people feel strongly about, that they like, then they have to go and amend the Constitution. You have to amend the Constitution if there are things you don't like in the bylaws. If the bylaw does not allow
but
you...
how so? Do we have access?
You do.
Do we have access, Noma? Do we have access as ordinary South Africans to challenge those systems without resources?
Yes,
That's my question.
Yes,
because I read the bylaws when I was chased away, and I said, what is my power as a South African with limited resource to go challenge a bylaw of 1965? What are the systems and protocols in place? So it is easier said than done.
What are the systems and protocols in place?
I agree with you. I would ask a very simple question. Where did you go? Did you go to the Cultural Commission to say, this is a law that takes away my right to practice my culture? Because you are allowed to practice your culture. Provided the culture doesn't harm the other person, you have every right, and I support you in doing that. So we need to ask those questions. How do we practice whatever we practice without harming the next person? And if I am a woman, and as a woman traditional leader, traditional healer, I fully support you. But I would not support you if you do it in a manner that harms the next person.
All right.
So we'll come back to some of the harmful traditional practices, like the one she was talking about.
Right.
So the real debate here, what are the harmful traditional practices?
I'd like to get that from the floor. Is there anybody that would like to comment on that? Thank you, Tata. Please stand up for us. What is your name?
My name is Manene Taban.
Sure, no problem.
For as long as when we want to explain or define our culture, we use English terms.
Yeah.
That will further confuse our society.
Yeah.
For as long as we're doing that, we'll have problems. Like now, Umama is talking about the harmful traditional practices. In our own culture, what are those harmful traditional practices?
Yes. Sure.
Because what we have cultural practices that are not harmful.
Upasha.
For the mere fact you'll say it's a harmful practice, it means that the explanation comes from Europe.
Yes.
It's Eurocentric.
Yes.
Then it confuses us. That is the problem.
Thank you. I know that there are some disempowered women in the audience. Is there anybody in that regard who would like to comment? Hey, please stand up, Mama.
Kodwa ngifisa ukukhuluma nawe Makhosi. Uyajabula wena ulwela umfula. Thina singabantu abane-albinism asisena ndawo. Siyasaba. Kuzoze kube nini sikhona kuthiwa abafi bayanyamalala. Kukhane kubonakalayo ukuthi hayi bayafa ngoba bebulewe. Makhosi. Indumba yakho mayisingenqe izandla yangibulala yayoyenza inhlanhla yelotho or inhlanhla ukuthi ube rich kusika kuphi ku okwesibili Makhosi awunike isikhathi Makhosi okwesibili umama wami angithathe angitshontshe azokunikeza wena kuza kanjani sizwe sinsundu nithulile babu Thobejani kuthuliwe babu Mapela siyabulawa siyagenqwa asinayo impilo na ake siphumelene neshashalazini sibhekisise ukuthi singaba kobani futhi ke as a gender commissioner sekuthathwa thina bomama thina sinayo impilo siswa omama kobaba kanti kwenze njani ma-Afrika ngoba sithi thina sasikhulumeni isiZulu.
Ngiyabonga mama. All right, Goko Dineo and Danzi, I'll give you a chance to respond.
Stop confusing us nabathakathi. Mawufika esigodlweni sami nginqamula umuntu angisaphilisi. Igama lithi nyanga, it means the one of the sun and the one that facilitates healing.
All right. Let me jump right in there. Let me jump right in there for a second.
We need to start teaching.
Thank you, Goko.
Abathakathi ma, I just made a distinction.
Mama.
Ngidistinguishile ngathi mina ngiyalapha.
Ngiyabonga Goko. Methoko Mpumlwana, I mean, there seem to be two, huge discrepancies here. There's a desire on the one hand to hold on to our culture, and on the other hand, we're fighting for basic human rights. So when will these two find each other eventually?
I don't think the Constitution disputes the fact that you have a right to practice your culture. I think that's the problem. The Constitution does not say, do not practice your culture. It simply says, as you practice your culture, be mindful that the next person you don't harm. And so when you were talking about, when she was talking, she's talking about what this freedom can do to other people, right? People can say, it's my constitutional right to practice what that says. And the Constitution says, that is now harmful.
Yes.
This is what I was trying to explain when I say, we are trying now to sieve out those practices that take away ubuntu bomnye umntu, nobuntu community etila. That's all we're trying to do. And we want, as the Commission for Gender, to support traditional leaders, because we hear traditional leaders are working with those who know the law in terms of how to synergize, sift out some of the harmful practices so that people can practice their cultures comfortably.
All right. You're watching The Big Debate. Don't go away. Welcome back to The Big Debate on tradition, culture, and human rights. I'm Masachaba Ndlovu. When does customary law apply, and when does the so-called Roman Dutch law apply? Tate Thandabantu.
We have a situation where we used to be a dual jurisdiction, Roman Dutch law and customary law. If you look at the decisions of the Constitutional Court, the attempt is being made to say there are going to be some markers, some serious human rights constitutional points that are non-negotiable. And we are going to nail those on the wall, although we are aware that there is a multitude of practices that it would just be dangerous for the Constitution and the court to make a list of them and wipe them off the slate one by one because of this identity thing. That the things we do, some of them are not wholly perfect. But then other cultures too, their practices and the things they do and their laws are not wholly perfect. Roman Dutch law, English law are riven through and through with innate patriarchy, sexism. I teach family law, so I know this. So I think, finally, a very quick point, what we are getting to and the reason that makes this debate a very, heating, one that is overheating already, is because I suspect in this country today, you had the applause when the point was about defending culture. There is a growing impatience by African people to find themselves in what they consider to be an onslaught, as if African values have nothing at all to contribute to the new country.
Okay, all right. And I'll come to you, Mekana. How do we find the balance? Because we love our culture, yes, but there are people who are being harmed, there are people who are being hurt, killed in some instances.
Yeah. I would actually want to go back to the issue of virginity testing. Indeed, it's about culture, and somewhere choice was mentioned. But also we need to be careful about choice, because the maturity of the child also should be taken into consideration. You can't say an 8-year-old child should be allowed to make choice. Based on what? Because they're not mature enough to know whether it's right or wrong. But luckily in South Africa, we have the Child Justice Act, where this is clearly articulated, that as long as they are not at the age of 16, it's only after the age of 16 that they can actually apply what we refer to as choice. But before then, it's not allowed. That girl children should actually have virginity testing. But anything that is criminal, like what Ms. Zane has talked about, like a 14-year-old being given to some men, it's criminal. She was supposed to actually go and report the next day to the police.
Thank you.
In fact, her grandmother did. Her grandmother sent a brother to go and report to the police, and the police refused, saying it's
or what were they saying? Or government is not clear because the constitution recognizes our customs and traditions, and the person was not. I heard the commissioner saying we should go and report these criminals. It's not easy because even if you go to a police station, they don't arrest the person. They say our constitution recognizes our
Clearly, there's
customary
confusion
law,
even
and
within
they
the
see
system.
it as
We're
customary
going to
law.
get to all of you in just a moment. When we return, some powerful personal stories from our audience. You're watching The Big Debate.
Ngududuzile Xaba. Ngaba nenkinga ubaba wabhala iwill. Wayinika umama uthe mayisezoshona wangibiza wanginika iwill. Le will kababa ithi yonke into obengeyakhe uzothi mayishona umama kube yami. So ke ngahamba ngaya lapha enkosini, inkosi yathi kimi ubaba wami wayenganayo enye umfana ukuze abhale iwill ngami. Ngambuza ke mina ngathi baba wena uma umama wakwakhe ekhulelwe uyadecide antazali umntwana muni. Mangimbuza lo mbuzo wathi kimi ngiyadelela. Kune half brother yami. Wakholiyuda nayo ke ngoba i-half brother yami yayihlala nobaba. Mina umama nobaba bahlukana ngimncane. So ke emva kwalokho inkosi yayise umfowethu wayesefuna ukungidubula.
Ukudubula?
Yebo ubufunda la. About the gun, the police still have it.
Wow.
Engitshela ukuthi inkosi ithe angeke ngize ngiyithole le handle. So ngenye ilanga masifika khona sathola ukuthi uyapenda. Uthi ke yena inkosi ithe aqhashisa abantu. So wathi inkosi ithe izokulaya ngoba la ensimini sizofaka amatshotshombe. La umatshotshombe afakwa. Mangifona ngibuza ukuthi laba abantu babhadala kubani. Kwathiwa babhadala enkosini. Angizi kuyi-issue area. Okungiphatha kabuhlungu ke ukuthi wangitshela ukuthi ngumfazi. Angikwazi ukuyishintsha ngoba ngidecide ukuba umfazi. And angizange ngisho ukuthi le will ibhalo ubaba, angizange ngimcele. Ngenzeni ke mina? Ngacishe ngafa ubonile ekubhalweni la. About the gun, the gun.
The police still have it.
Iyazi inkosi.
All right. Ngiyabonga mama.
These so-called harmful practices or practices that tend to be harmful continue to take place in communities, and there is an elephant in the room. Why are they not being solved? I'll give an example. Every December and every June, we know that boys go to circumcision and many of them die. 43 upwards, and they come dismembered. And those people that do that are known by everybody, and nothing happens to them. What is the elephant in the room? And what are we going to do as community members that are responsible and know what is supposed to be done?
Thank you.
Yala gona banu hekelibeletse olimo rena community mola religion tsa mapolisa le khoshi le dona bana ba rene ba tshwantse go kry-a listene dona a ba filistene manyasa ba tswa ka nte ba nyaka listene ba di reka ka bo 10,000 Masomalia ba di reka bo 10,000 bana ba rena bjale ba thoka listene ka baka la tšhelete eo rile re ya ro boledišana le dona ya kgoši ya ntšha ma security ya yona ke batlilong rwala bon kidnapper I'm sure it's 40 hours mo ba bampeile ona ke robetse ona a ona dijo a ona metsi a ona toilet mara ke tronko ya kgoši ka bošuba khumana e le gore ne o na le ba ba nyakang ba ntšea mo plekeng ba re ke spook parka e le gore ana fo ba rile ba tlilong tšea bankiša gae ka khumana ba betha ba bangwe kore ba betha ka mefeng ya dipeke kore bana banenyana ba banyane kore ba bethiwe ke na le 35 ya batho ba obetse ba mo tsamaya ka wheelchair so ke kgoši ke mokgwa wa kgoši that's why le tswa ke re re le community re dijo tša kgoši le nduna le mokhanselara
Khoshi, what recourse do the men and women sitting behind me have in this event?
I'm sure we are hearing one side of the story. We don't get what causes what might have happened. It would have been an ideal if by now, when you gave him, this space to account, the very same traditional council that he's talking about allege that they've done 1, 2, 3. They are here, respond for themselves. Issues that he's mentioning about them are not generic. It's specified to say 1, 2, 3.
That's
you
a very fair
cannot
point.
measure the institution of traditional leaders by one, traditional leader.
That's a fair
We
point.
are
If I may
calling
interject there for a second, that's a fair point, Khoshi. Askisu kena khanong. Impa, let's put this case aside. Let's talk about the men and women who have been brutalized. Generally, what is their recourse?
Our culture at no stage. That is why we had no prisons. We've got no intention to harm on, to make anyone to suffer. We are always making sure that we change the behavior of individuals without, brutally harming anyone. We've got no system whatsoever which saying somebody should harm one another. We don't know of that. It's not part of Contralesa. Contralesa have got no policy, no role that said you must, harm anyone basically because he has got different understanding with yourself. I want to believe that recourses will be defined when you know what causes what we are talking about. You can't just generally say that, yes, every person who committed crime in our culture has to, negotiate it to make sure that he changed. He comes back to the society. We transform your behavior into what the society wanted.
All right.
We don't punish anyone.
After the break, closing comments from our panel. Welcome back to the big debate. I'm Masachaba Ndlovu. Let's hear from our panel. Tanda Bantu.
I think the big question is really how tradition, culture, and the constitution are supposed to work together. My own sense is that of many elephants in the room in the South African debate, another elephant in the room is quite honestly a disconnect between the constitution and the loyalty here of the majority of people, particularly ordinary people who haven't had much schooling, who live in the rural areas. And so I guess the question to pose is what really do we need to do to make everybody out there stop asking the question, ukuthi kule constitution yabo ngikuphi mina? And if we can crack that, we may well be on our way towards the social cohesion, the respect for human rights, and the respect for cultural diversity that we all seek.
Thank you.
The point I would like to put forward is that quite evidently, I think most of the South Africans still need to have human rights awareness programs so that we can be on par in terms of what we regard as what is the provisions of the Constitution of South Africa, so that people can really understand their rights, people can know how to access those rights. I've heard people saying that matters were reported to the police and they don't know what to do. We have what we call IPID, which is a directorate that actually looks at matters of that nature. But like I said before, it's also important to have some of these institutions being based in these communities, far away from the cities, even if it's in a form of advice officers, so that our people can be assisted to know how to access their rights. Because the Constitution is nothing if it does not have meaning for South Africans.
Khoshi.
On behalf of the Congress of Traditional Leaders of South Africa, we want to welcome all the issues that have been raised in this debate. And we would love to comment on the following. One, that we call on all our traditional leaders to stop manhunting any member of the society, whether on the basis of lesbian, on the basis of whatever they've been born with. We must embrace them. They're part of the society we are leading. Two, would want to call on again our traditional leaders and our structures across the board to stand up and avail themselves to help solving challenges that are confronting our societies. We should always be there when the community wanted us. 3, the issue relating to the isolation of Kgoshi in the community should come to an end. Kgoshi is Kgoshi with Sechaba. There's no decision that can be taken by Kgoshi alone in Polokwane. Decisions are taken in council, implemented on behalf of the interest of the society. Let the society be allowed to participate in issues relating to their life in every communities that we are leading. We would want to believe that if we are going to improve in that space, we will be able, as we are in the program of redefining, re-establishing ourselves, refounding ourselves after we have been, distorted by colonized and apartheid, to make sure that we are working with everybody. The institutions that are supporting democracy, they should not see us outside themselves. We are collective, we are working with them to build South Africa to become a better country for all of us.
Thank you. Thogo Mkhwanazi Xaluva.
I think in conclusion, we should say that people's cultural practices will not be abolished by other people who come from a different community. That we need to respect that people have a right, a constitutional right, to enjoy their culture. And that we shouldn't use Western concepts that are foreign to people to define issues like dignity. Dignity is a community issue. So once you start saying bodily functions being violated, all those issues, we are saying allow people to determine those things. The issue of a harmful traditional practice, I find it very strange that when it's a harmful religious practice, we then say, oh, it's just that pastor was doing that. But the actual thing called tithing is this. That one is abusing people. But when it's culture, we say abolish culture. The day people say abolish Christianity, I'll say, yes, let's abolish culture as well.
Fair enough.
KwaZulu Natal, kunama traditional leaders awu 300. Kulo 300 ngazi ama traditional leaders amabili kuphela who allocate land to women in their own right as women. Bonke laba abanye kufanele ukuthi ngimelwe na umzukulu wami ukuthi ngithole umhlaba. Kuyaziwa iAfrika yonke ukuthi ukudla esikudlayo kulinganiswa okutshalwayo ukuthi 80% wako kusuke kutshalwe abantu besifazane, kodwa asinikezwa umhlaba kwaZulu Natal. Angazi ukuthi bangakhi osisi nomama abaphucwe umhlaba wabo njengosisidudu. Uyadayisa umhlaba wonke osemagameni abantu besifazane, uyadayiswa amakhosi Kgoshi. Amakhosi adayisa umhlaba wabantu besifazane njengoba deshe usisi. Indaba yamakhosi kwaZulu Natal kufanele ukuthi ilungiswe ukuze sikwazi ukuthi kube nokuthula bonke abantu amakhosi ayazi constitution ukuthi iyasivumela ukuthi sibe abanikazi bomhlaba nempahla.
Siyabonga.
Ngiyabonga.
Obed.
The government has listened to ebantwini ukuthi laba abahlala kuma traditional communities ukuthi ama rights wabo awakakapheleli awafanani nama rights wa wonke umuntu waseMzansi Afrika. So ngaloko ke esu department ye COGTA sinikezwe ukuthi sike sihlale namakhosi sike siwobheka yonke lento lezenzakalayo kulomphakathi lapha abantu abahlala khona ukuthi amapha ama rights aviolatiweyo, amapha ama rights abizwayo, and also amapha ama rights eka distorted, and sike siwelungisa le ndaba le so that ama rights wabantu abahlala ebukhosini afanane na wonke ama rights wabonke abantu baseMzansi. And yesibili ukuthi kunabantu abahijack iculture yethu. Unfortunately kumthetho uzofana ukuthi uqiniswe lapho kakhulu ku-initiation ukuthi ke sikwazi ke ukuthi sibe nemithetho ezokwazi ukubabopha sibagwebe for ukuhijack iculture for their own commercial reasons. So ngaloko ke if iculture yamoshwa sizofana ukuthi siqinise nathi isandla sohulumente and sizwele izikhalo zenu and sizozama ukuthi silungise and iculture mayike iprevail, iculture siyithande Singama Africa, we are an African country in Africa. South Africa is ought to really pursue our cultural rights.
Nolundi.
Thanks, Mr. Chaba. 2 points really from my side. I think the first is to, with great respect, acknowledge and recognize the courage and the pain that's been shared in some of the stories here. A lot of the communities, like the people from Malechi, do so at great risk to themselves. And they do so not because they're speaking for the abolition of culture, but rather they're speaking from a place of loving their culture and customs to the extent that they're going to step up and be brave enough and say, this is not actually our culture, this is wrong. This thing that is happening to us is not acceptable. And so to acknowledge that, I think, is incredibly important. My closing point is just to say that these are issues for me that are fundamentally issues about South African citizenship. These are issues that go to the heart of what it means to be an equal citizen in this country. And I would urge us all to continue to have what are incredibly complex conversations in a way that meets people where they are, in a way that meets people and acknowledges how people are living in their daily lives. And if that is the fundamental starting point, then I think that we might be on our way to finding some of the answers to these issues. Thank you.
Togo Mpumlwana.
I just want to end by saying that this is the supreme law of the country. It is a law that makes everyone feel they belong. It is a law that says those who are powerful must remember that the power they use, they must use it with love, with compassion, and with understanding. And therefore, as the Commission for Gender Equality, we shall continue to lift up this constitution that says equally all people have a right to be in South Africa, and also that whether we are a man or we are a woman, or you have a different sexual orientation, or you are a traditional healer, or you are a pastor, you have a right to practice, provided that you understand that all rights go with responsibilities. And that we're all building a country. It's 22 years, it is difficult, but unless we continue to talk, and unless we continue to embrace one another, and not be arrogant, and not call this a Western constitution. It is our constitution. We must build it and know that some of the things we do are harmful, and be humble enough to accept that, but also know that we can actually be who we are without harming the next person. Thank you.
Thank you. Culture is dynamic. It changes with the times. But sometimes it seems that the process gets stuck, leaving some people vulnerable. Have some of our traditions been subverted so that they now serve as tools of oppression and control? Is there a way to ensure that culture is an inspirational force which enables us to live our full potential? You decide. From me, Masachaba Ndlovu, thank you for watching The Big Debate.